Welcome to another Adventures in Fly Tying episode with FlyFishOhio.com. I'm your host, Joe Cornwall. We're coming to you today from the Cincinnati Fly Fishing Expo, sponsored by the Buckeye United Fly Fishers. What a great day to be here tying flies. We got some really interesting patterns for you today. This pattern, let's take a look, very interesting. This is a John Gierach pattern. This is actually his take on a mostly weedless woolly bugger, which is kind of unique because the wing is tied in a traditional streamer motif as opposed to a traditional woolly bugger from the back, but it does have the palmered hackle, making it a woolly bugger. It does have a few additional materials, making it kind of unique. I think this is a very creative fly. I think this is a fly that'll really work well on the creeks for smallmouth, for rock bass, especially on the ponds for bluegill. I think this is an awesome little pattern. Let's go ahead and tie one. We're going to tie this on a size 6 Mustad C53S. This is a curved nymph hook, the same type that you're using for so many of your other nymph type patterns. We're going to use this in a slightly larger size 6. We're going to go ahead and put that in our vise. The first thing that we're going to do is start by laying down a base of black thread all the way to a point roughly above the point of the hook. Now, I don't want to go too far back. I want to leave some of that open. What we're also going to do is we're going to take a little bit of lead wire. We're going to pinch a little bit of that off, and we are going to wrap this lead wire, it'd be better if I did it this way, to the back of the shank of the hook. Now, why are we going to do that? Because I want this hook to invert when it's in the water. Now, we're going to use a little bit of deer hair, which will help it to invert anyway, but once again, we want that fly to fish point up, so that little bit of lead right there will not only help to sink it, but will also make sure that it inverts into the water. So, get that piece of lead on there. That's about all that you need. Now, the next step, I'm going to take a black hackle, stroke those hackle fibers back. I'm going to tie that in as the ribbing material for this particular pattern. Now, usually a woolly bugger is tied with a chenille body. In this case, we're going to tie this with a dubbed body. The first one that I showed you is dubbed with black rabbit, but you can get a little bit creative. What we're going to do now is we're going to use a little bit of this and this, except for that bit of feather there. That is a woodchuck, and a woodchuck has wonderful spiky underfur that you can use, and that's what we're going to use right here. I've already taken a little bit out, so let's put a little bit of wax on my thread, and let's dub a thin woodchuck body. There's that little bit of woodchuck. I start by making sure that it's nicely mixed. Spin that onto that wax thread. You want this body to be a little bit on the thin side. You want this to be a little bit on the sparse side. So, there you go. And I think this is kind of nice because it adds a little bit of a mottled color, adds a little bit of contrast to the fly, adds a little bit of spikiness to the fly. Once again, keep that a little bit on the thin side. You don't want to get, out of line with making a big fat body, because this is a fly that's going to imitate primarily, I think, a real good imitation of damselflies, dragonflies, probably a pretty good imitation of Dobson fly larvae, of small hellgrammites, things like that, fish fly larvae, just about anything like that, size 6, even small crayfish or small bait fish can be imitated by something like this. So it's really a kind of a generic pattern. So now that I've dubbed the body, let's take and wrap that woolly bugger hackle. Of course, I'm using a one of the things I do about woolly buggers that I personally like to do is I like to use a hackle that's a little bit on the stiffer side. I'm using a saddle hackle, and I like those barbs to be a little on the stiffer side. Unlike the marabou tail, which has a lot of action, I want the hackle barbs to actually not bend as much, provide a little bit of underwater disturbance. I want them to displace some water, so when I'm retrieving this, it has a little bit of a sonic signature. Also, you're going to find that little bit of spiky hackle, not quite dry fly quality, that little bit of spiky hackle is also going to help this to remain weedless. We want to fish this on the bottom, we want to bounce it around rocks, logs, weeds, so we need to have a little bit of room. So now the next step is, let's add a little bit of bucktail. What we're going to do here is we're going to take some bucktail from the back of the animal, from the back of the tail, the part that you normally would not use. Clip that out. I want to use just a little bit. So this is going to be, clean that out a little bit more. I want to keep these things just a little bit on the sparse side. And that's plenty. Actually, that's even too much. Let's get a little more. There we go. That's plenty right there. Really sparse. A little bit of that brown bucktail. I want that brown bucktail to go just past the bend of the hook. So that's my cutoff point right there. Let's trim that down. Lock that bucktail into place. So all I really need is 2 or 3 wraps, tight wraps to hold that into place. Now that bucktail, because it's buoyant, it's going to flip that hook upside down and allow it to run like that. The next step, we're going to take a little bit of marabou. Let's take a marabou blood quill. We can take just the tip of the blood quill, which will work beautifully well on something like this. I'm going to strip that back. And that's about all that I want right there. Just a little bit. Cut that away. I want that marabou to be about as long as that bucktail was. I can go ahead and get in there and flip out that excess. And then the last thing that we want to add to this is a little bit of peacock curl. I'm using strung peacock curl here. You could also use a peacock eyes. I really only want to use maybe 4 or 5. You know, peacock curl, really, if there's a magic material that you're going to tie flies with, I think peacock curl is as close to it as you can get. It really, in the water, it's got some action to it, but it's got this sparkle that's very lifelike. And I want that peacock curl, once again, just to go about to the end of that tail, so these are all going to line up. Line that up on there, clip that back. Now let's get that peacock curl on top. This is the mostly weedless woolly bugger. That bucktail will keep this from picking up weeds, will keep it from getting hung in the rocks. Throw a whip finish across there. That's all we have to do is add a little bit of fly tying lacquer. I like to use Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails. I think it's wonderful. Great material. Probably sell more of this to fly tyers than they do to people who are doing their fingernails. I put a little bit on the end of a toothpick, which allows me to be very precise with placement. Soak that in there really good. And there you have it. That is the John Gierach version of the weedless bugger, or the woolly bugger, the mostly weedless woolly bugger, as I found in Gary Sosey's book, Woolly Wisdom. What a great pattern. Thanks for joining us on Adventures in Fly Tying, a FlyFishOhio.com special. We'll see you next time. Tight lines.